Hi, this is Will Brown. I'm an associate professor here at the Bush School, Texas A&M University, and director of the nonprofit management program. Tell you just a little bit about the Emerging Leaders program that we offer. There's sort of 4 features of the program. We talk about obviously defining and thinking about leadership. We do some self-assessment work. We provide an individual leadership development plan. And we do an exercise called double loop learning. There's a few other pieces, but those are the core fundamental elements. And here's the outline of what it looked like. Provide an orientation and a review of public service leadership, what that looks like, and thinking about that. So the first afternoon is spent doing that. In the evening, we move to our self-assessment piece, which is we use the Strengths Quest. Day 2 is primarily doing this element, what we call double loop learning by Dominic Bearfield, an associate professor here. The day 3 is with Joe Cerami, who's the director of our leadership program, and he works through the individual leadership development plan. And then on the last evening, we go out to dinner. Let me talk about the program elements. So one of the first things we do is thinking a little bit about leadership. It's an Emerging Leaders program. We ask them to try and define what that looks like. What do they mean by that? Getting them to think about what it is that they're trying to be able to achieve. We have actually a pretty good conversation reading through some of these different definitions that are provided by some leaders in the field, and prioritizing or emphasizing different aspects of these and why those were the definitions that were developed by these folks. One of the areas that we try to emphasize is recognizing that leadership happens at all different levels within and outside the organization. So of course we sort of start with ourselves, manage ourselves, so to speak. Maybe that isn't necessarily leadership, but when you think about our personalities, our dispositions, and our emotional sort of self, that's a pretty important element in reference to the kind of leader that you are. We move to small group features. We talk a little bit about the idea of organizing or working within the organization and providing strategic direction and managerial tools and operational frontline kinds of activities, and how leadership can take place in every one of those areas. And then outside of the organization, which is building networks or accessing resources, as well as work that's done in the community to try and address broader social community issues, is an aspect of leadership. So we oftentimes find ourselves focusing in on certain individuals that we perceive as being leaders because they function in perhaps a bit more of a visual or a public kind of space, and getting people to recognize that leadership happens in multiple places. These are messages that are typically reinforced, but they're discussed specifically on the first afternoon. And then we spend a little bit of time doing some self-assessment. We've used a couple of different tools, but recently we use the Strengths Quest, which is a focus on sort of your skills or your talents. What is it that you are very good at? Currently this is been used by thousands of folks, and quite effective assessment. Of the 34, 5 are brought up at the top. They just give you the top 5 so that you can begin to think about where your strengths and where your talents are. So that can be quite useful as and one of the philosophies of the program is this idea that we build on our strengths and capitalize on what we're good at. And then the workshop, which runs in the evening, helps process those, details them, thinks about how you have certain areas of strength and that certain areas are not as dominant. They cluster the strengths into categories so that you can sort of see where you fit in relation to some of the broad themes that the strengths are related to. And that helps quite a bit for folks to think about. The Emerging Leaders, the individual leadership plan is, again, a core feature of what we do. It's built on this framework where we get people to think about their values, we think about their attributes, think about the skills that they have, thinking about the knowledge that they need to be able to improve. So starting at the top and sort of working them way down, we work through each one of these statements, or each one of these issues. I'll talk through each one here in just a little bit of detail. It starts with a modest attempt to try and be able to come up with a vision statement for yourself, thinking about who you want to be and what you want to do and what some of the core principles and values are. And pretty quickly we start talking about getting them to try and list and think through what are the pieces that are particularly important to you. How is this critical to who you are? Again, the importance of thinking about who you are and where you imagine yourself to be able to go. And then we start to move a little bit to behaviors, the way that you interact with individuals, the way you interact with others, and touch on some of these ideas of emotional intelligence, and how you're able to interact with others, and the way that you do that as being pretty fundamental, and thinking about how can I be more or less in certain ways. And then we talk about skills, and obviously it's an extensive list of areas where individuals can be thinking about, but this gets down to the nitty-gritty of thinking about very specific skills and related to management, empowering, or delegating, or very specific skills in reference to conflict comes up quite often. How do you deal with conflict, et cetera, et cetera. So getting them to think a little bit about both the areas where they can improve and the areas that they have some abilities. And then we get them to think about their knowledge base. Okay, if those are the skills that you have or would need to have or would like to get better at, what should you learn? What should you be reading? How should you be thinking about some of these things, and how do you move forward? So you can see that the individual leadership plan covers a lot of ground, which then culminates with this setting of goals and sort of establishing what is it that you want to try and be able to do, and trying to get specific in and across any one of those different areas. So it's pretty important, and can be quite valuable for folks to be able to think about timelines, specific actions that they're going to try and implement in relation to the leadership objectives or leadership goals that they would like to be able to attain. The last element I'm going to introduce you to is this idea of double loop learning, which is put together based on an article by Chris Argyris, which talks about teaching smart people how to learn. And one of the ideas is most of these folks are pretty good at problem solving outside. They see a challenge, they see a problem. One of the reasons that they're here is they're good at that, and they typically have used those skill sets to make themselves successful, and will continue to rely on their ability to be able to analyze and address a problem and to execute. What this article says is that at certain times in people's careers, even in certain times in our work context, we find ourselves frustrated, or the current problem-solving toolkit that we have isn't fully reflective of the context that we're operating in now. And so rather than continuing to be outside-oriented, what's the problem with others, we begin to think a little bit about ourselves. How am I contributing to the success or the challenges that the organization, or that I'm experiencing in this organization, and what can I do to try and be able to minimize those? And we spent quite a bit of time trying to break down some of the defensive reasoning, and that really blocks people's ability to be able to effectively interpret what's going on. And it's really, a bit of a reflection on how's that really working for you, and to what degree are you able to recognize your own, this is a tricky one, right? Our own elements that contribute to the challenges that we confront. And so it's a good piece, and it takes quite a bit of work to try and get people to take a bit of ownership, but they also have to be open to being able to do that. We provide lots of information, lots of direction and guidance. It's a tremendous amount of material that gets put on folks. They have a strong group of peers that are here with them, and it makes a big difference to be able to rely on those folks. And they spend a fair amount of time reflecting about themselves and the organizations that they're working in, but they really need to take forward how are they going to apply this information, and what is that going to mean as they go forward.